This video is part 2 of my demo for inner points and reverse applique. I have completed my back basting using the quick prep stitch. I've also stitched one of the reverse applique areas. We have one more to do here, and I would like to show you how I do that. First of all, we have to make a hole in the applique fabric, a slit, but we don't want to cut the background. So I prefer, personally, to take a pin and put it in between the applique fabric and the background fabric. And as you can see, it's a pretty good size pin. Let me show you the back side. Okay, the pin does not go through that. I'm then going to take an old pair of scissors, and please note my stressing the old part, and make one clip right on top of the pin. I'll remove it. Then using my good scissors, I'm going to come in and clip down to about 1/4 of an inch of the point. At that point, I'm going to stop and reposition my scissors, being sure they go right into the point. I want to make just one clip so that I don't have lots of little ends. One clip and I'm done. I'll turn the other and go exactly the same way. I'll go about 1/4 of an inch away from the point. I'll stop, reposition my scissors, and make one clip into the point. Okay. Now, in looking at this, it looks like my seam allowance could be just slightly bigger. The seam allowance itself will be slightly bigger than the area of the stem that I have marked with my quick prep applique. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to reduce it down so that my seam allowance is within the same area as the width of my stem. And I'll do the same on the other side. I'm going to go in here. Okay, because you don't want seam allowances that are too big. If they're too big, you'll not be able to tuck them under, and that isn't good. Also, while these concave curves are very, very gradual, I'm still going to relieve them a little bit. And the reason I do that is that they will lay much flatter when relieved. So I'm coming in, I am only clipping in about 2/3 of the way. You don't want to go very deep. To go very deep, to go up to your basting line, could produce an inner pokey, which we really wouldn't like to have. First, I'm going to come in and clip a stitch, a basting stitch. I'm going to leave a basting stitch and clip the next one, leave one and clip the first one around the point. I am using a Clover black and gold needle. I absolutely love them. I prefer either 10, 11, or 12s, and will use either the applique needle or the between. Both work great for me. I have Superior kimono thread threaded on my needle. I have an appliqueur's knot at the base. This holds my silk thread so it doesn't pull off. And at the other end, I have a quilter's knot. And now I'm ready to begin stitching. Let's get this a little closer so that you can see what I'm going to be doing. I'll try to hold this steady because I know it can be kind of jumpy. Here we go. We're going to go right into the fold line. That would be the line. I can see the white thread here and here. This is my stitching line for the inside of the curve. And I'm going to take and put my needle right in that line and pull it through, burying it in the seam allowance. Okay, I'm going to then take my cuticle stick, which I use to turn under my edges. I'm going to very gently lift this first stitch out of the background fabric, and I'm going to take and turn it under and pull it over. And please notice I have 2 stitches, one on each side of my thread, that are exactly on the fold. This tells me exactly where the edge of my applique is. I'm going to go ahead take a few very tiny little stitches as I'm moving up towards the point. Let me get this back up here so we keep it right in your center of vision. Okay, as I get down here to the point, I am going to take and do something a wee bit different. Different for me, that is. Let me get my screen pulled back here. I am going to take and paint the inner point with fabric glue. I will take and get just a little on my needle. This can be fun. You don't want too much, and it just never wants to cooperate with you exactly. But you try getting some. I think maybe that's going to be, nope, it's not going to be enough. There we go. I have got a little bit piled here of fabric glue. I'm going to put it directly into the point on the seam allowance side. Okay. Okay. Now please notice I'm working it into the fabric a little bit, always staying within the seam allowance. And I can see that with my white basting stitches just to where the seam allowance is. I'm staying in there and working this in. Once I get it worked in, I'm ready to turn under to the point. So first I'm going to remove my basting stitch. I don't really want it in there going into the point. Then I'm going to take my needle. I never ever use wood in a point. And I'm going to go in here to the point and then pull it under. And it can be just that simple. There is glue on that seam allowance, so with my thumbnail I'm holding it in place so it remains there, stays nice and tight against my background. Give it a few seconds, and then we're going to go ahead and stitch up to that inner point. Inner points can be very, very scary, but I have discovered that painting, working the glue actually into the seam allowance, helps provide a stability that I don't get any other way. And I can play with it. I don't have to hurry. As we turn the corner, I'll tell you one of the things I often do that is a problem and how I solved it. Okay, when I get down to the point, I like to take a stitch right at that point, then go in between the background fabric and the applique fabric. Take a little tiny stitch and pull it up tight. That gives a really sharp little point. Now I am ready to turn. Can you see my little point in there? Okay, I'm going to take first and clip the second stitch and the fourth stitch. I'm then going to take and I'm going to use my cuticle stick. I'm going to turn it under and push the seam allowance away. And as I push it away, sometimes it will fold down into the corner. It didn't this time, so I'm just going to take my needle. I'm going to come in here. Okay, I'm going to go right into that point again, And I'm going to go in and pull it way back so it's sharp and take my needle to the back. Then I'm going to look very carefully at that point. Can you see it really well? Let's get a little closer. Here we go. You see that point? Oftentimes, I will take it too low, and if I do, I actually take and put my needle in here and pull it up so that I end up with a very, very sharp little point. I often overturn it, and I think that's probably a problem that many of you do. Once I'm happy with that, I go ahead and put in some stitches. The first one I take is a little bit away from the point, and then I will work my way back to the point. I'm bouncing around, aren't I? And that's because I'm way too close. Let me back up a little so that it doesn't bounce on me. I'll put in 2 or 3 stitches as I work back towards the point. Now remember, you're not coming out the fold. The closer you get to the point, the less fold there is. It just doesn't exist. I'm using a stab stitch as I work my way back. But the big thing about this is that the fabric is being held in place by the fabric glue, and please notice I have not had any little tiny ends, little tiny threads to deal with. By actually working that fabric glue into your seam allowance, you are kind of bonding it so that when you turn it under, you don't have a lot of little edges sticking out, little ends. We are going to now finish up by working our way down to the next point. I'll paint the glue on both sides of the seam allowance, working it into the fabric itself so that when I turn it, I have no little ends and can end up with a very sharp, pretty little point. This concludes my demo on the inner point and reverse applique. And I would like to point out to quilters that reverse applique really isn't any different than any other type of applique. You do your inner points the same, you do your outer points the same, you do your inner curves and your outer curves the same. The only difference is one of definition, and that is that a reverse applique is totally surrounded by fabric. It doesn't have an edge that slides under something else, nor does it have an edge that is on the outside. The pattern that was used as a demo in today's video is called Fern's Hens. It is available free of charge to you in the files section of my Facebook page, which is called Apple Blossom Quilts Group. Be sure to add that group to the end. You will also find other free patterns there, as well as lessons that teach you my quick prep applique method.